More than 100 pro-Palestinian marches are set to take place this weekend as police are to be given new powers to tackle offensive protests. Organisers of the marches that have drawn hundreds of thousands of people to London streets have planned smaller action in villages, towns and cities rather than holding a national march in the capital. Last night, crowds gathered outside the constituency office of Labour MP Rushnara Ali in East London, chanting "Vote her out," after she didn't back the vote for the ceasefire in Gaza. Another MP, the Shadow Welsh Secretary, Joe Stevens, had "You have blood on your hands" daubed on her office walls. So what is really behind these protests? We'll take some calls from you on that shortly. Joining me now, though, is the lawyer and writer Luke Gittos. Luke, always good to see you. Thank you for coming in. It's interesting, isn't it? Fundamentally, I think most of us support the right to protest, even if we really don't like the nature of the protest. In fact, you could argue it's more important if we don't like it because it proves our sort of authentic view in a democracy and freedom of speech. But there is a line here, isn't there? A line where if you break the law during a protest, then I think most of us, most right-minded people would say, well, you should be nicked for that. You should be arrested and you should either go to jail or get fined, whatever. What's happened here is that we're not really seeing much of that, although we're told by the police it happens after the protest more. We've certainly seen a lot of people obviously breaking the law, though, in the last few weeks.
Undoubtedly. So the police's powers to control and manage protests are contained in a series of acts called the Public Order Acts. There's been a number of them over recent decades. The most recent was actually this year, which gave the police new powers to deal with Just Stop Oil protesters, introducing new offences, new powers to stop and search. I think what we've seen with these demonstrations is a very clear policy decision being taken by the police, which is that you have 300,000 people on the streets. There is active engagement between the organisers and the police in advance of the demonstration. I think Mark Rowley took the decision not to cancel the demonstration because there had been, last week, because there had been that engagement. But what we've seen on the other side is these right-wing protesters showing up and actually being very heavy-handedly policed. We saw over 100 arrests of purportedly right-wing demonstrators last week. So I think what they're doing is they're saying, look, you have a mass of people here, we've got them under control with our existing powers, and we will crack down very hard on the right-wing contingent that show up. And then what we'll do is we'll chase down all the anti-Semitic nutcases on these demonstrations at a later date, using Twitter, using appeals to the public, etc. I think what people need to thus realise is that when you go on one of these demonstrations and contribute to the 300,000 who are on the streets, you effectively prevent anti-Semites being arrested and dealt with at the time. Because if these were smaller scale demonstrations, the police could obviously intervene very directly and make arrests at the scene. They can't do that because this is a mass demonstration. So the middle class bourgeois who are showing up on these demonstrations are actually providing perfect cover to anti-Semites, anti-Israelites and all the worst parts of these demonstrations. So it's not really good enough to say that, you know, they're all well-meaning and because you're right, we do support the rights of the Palestinians. It's appalling what's happening in Gaza to Gazan civilians. But you are providing a cover to anti-Semitic behaviour, and I think that's a real problem.
And I think it's quite a sizable problem as well. I mean, we keep, it's a tiny minority. I'm not so sure. I mean, just on your other point, I mentioned this, I think it was on Monday this week on the programme. If the British National Party said we're holding a peace rally, I don't think those same people would go. They'd say, well, OK, it's fine. I agree with the peace rally bit, but I don't want to be seen with the BNP. And yet it's fine to be seen with people, some of whom have very publicly and previously supported Hamas. We know that. Some have got placards from the river to the sea, which essentially is calling for the eradication of the world's only Jewish state, Israel. We've seen others with swastikas, people climbing up statues, maybe slightly different. We'll come to that in a second. But it is sizable, I think. I sense the underpinning of dubiousness and questionable behaviour is quite big here. But it's almost being camouflaged by, as you say, Mr. and Mrs. Miggins, who've come out of their £500 million flat in Notting Hill and gone, you know, we need to be with the people of Palestine. You know, that's all very good, but you're marching alongside some pretty dicey characters here.
Well, look, Stop the War, who helped organise Saturday's demonstration, they've consistently said that Hamas are a legitimate resistance movement. They've been cited, they're on the record for saying
there you go.
And the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, for example, have had to suspend their members, some of their members in Manchester, for demonstrating support for what happened October the 7th. So there can be no doubt that there are some very dubious organisations taking part in these marches now. But just coming onto your other point, which I think is really fascinating, is that I don't actually think most of the people who show up, or at least a good sizable chunk of the people on these marches, know that much about the Middle East. I think what we need to appreciate is that there is a real connection here between generalised anti-Western sentiment, particularly generalised anti-British sentiment, and the feelings on these marches. It's really striking how much evidence there is that people don't know which river they're talking about when they chant from the river to the sea. They don't know which sea they're talking about. They don't know that Hamas is an openly anti-Semitic organisation that has declared a wish to commit genocide against Israel. They don't know these things. And I think it's because in their minds, they have drawn a connection between Israel and generalised imperialism. You know, they see Israel as kind of the epitome of perhaps white privilege. It's really connected to Western identity politics.
Correct.
And that's where this is coming from. It reminded me weirdly of debates around Brexit, because it seems to have become now a kind of culture war issue. You're either on the good side of this, which is the Palestinian side, or the bad side, which is the Israeli side. And I think that idea that this is a good and bad conflict, that there is one side who's good and the other side is bad, it's been around for a long time.
That's the bit that's driving me nuts, to be honest, Luke. I mean, I've done this job a long time. I should be used to it and not get flustered by this. But the idea, and I said it in the monologue at the beginning, you know, the idea that, you know, we in the West, the civilised West, we're the bad guys, and these horrendous states in the Middle East are the good guys. You know, where the human rights records, the phrase I use would make Kim Jong-un sit up and blush. Yeah. You know, equality doesn't exist. Gay rights don't exist. Try and be, you know, was it Queers for Palestine? What the hell are they doing there? Goodness me, you know, try and do that in Gaza High Street and see how you get on. It's all of that, this sort of self-flagellating. It's anti-Israel, it's anti-West. There's a lot of that. And many of those, if you've got the old Venn diagram out, the Black Lives Matter protest, the anti-capitalist protest, you'd probably see a lot of the same people there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Jake Wallace-Simons has published a great book called Israelophobia, and really just making clear how this new visceral hatred of Israel has come to the fore. And, you know, pointing out the hypocrisy of it, you know.
Sure.
As you mentioned in the opening monologue, over 300,000 people killed in the war in Yemen. With, you know, most of the conflicts in the Middle East pale in comparison to what's going on in Israel right now.
Correct.
And let's be under no mistake, Israel's fighting a war for survival. It's a war, and war is appalling, and what we're seeing coming out of Gaza is absolutely terrifying. But the level of hypocrisy as to the criticism of Israel is absolutely out of control.
It's off the scale. Luke, good to see you. Thank you for coming in. Luke Gittos, the lawyer and writer with us here on TalkTV.